So I thought this was a centipede walking along the sidewalk. It's actually a dead, dried up worm being carried by a bunch of ants just gliding across the sidewalk. All of those ants carrying this dead worm.
For those listening on podcast, we're watching a video of a bunch of ants carrying a dead, dried up worm.
Because it's a dead worm being carried by a bunch of ants.
And it looks like a centipede.
Amazingly cool. Look at that.
All right, that's all we need. Look, I told Sean I was going to start with this video because there is a political analogy in there of about a bunch of little army ants carrying, the carcass of, it wasn't their kill, but it died of, presumably natural causes. There's a political analogy in there somewhere. Go ahead and make it. And now I'm wondering if Sean is thinking, my goodness, what have I signed myself up for coming on Viva? All right, everybody, this is going to be amazing. I have known Sean Spicer via the television, via Fox News, and via all of the other mainstream legacy media outlets for almost a decade. He used to be Trump's press secretary. And when this opportunity arose, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a little more diving, and I'm going to read his Wikipedia page to really get to know the true Sean Spicer. And I just, I briefly saw Sean right before we started, and I said, is anything off limits? And he said, absolutely nothing. And then he said, Wikipedia is evil. And I said, Wikipedia is kind of hilarious, and we're going to get into it. So if you don't know who Sean Spicer is, you should, you will. And we're going to delve into childhood, as we always do, come back to the present, and what Sean's doing now, and what he might have learned in his tenure as press secretary for the most hated man in the history of American politics by at least half of the country and at least the majority of legacy media. Bringing him in now, Sean, I'm going to bring into the stream. Here we go. Sir, how goes the battle?
It went well up until you talked about Wikipedia, but it was
there's an anecdote on Wikipedia about your experience in university, which we're going to get to in a second. Do you know where I'm going with that?
I was looking forward to this all week, and in a matter of about 8 seconds, you have taken it.
Well, Wikipedia is very nice. It does your military service justice. Then it brings up anecdotes, which they can only bring up to embarrass. But look, we'll get there in a second. Sean, we do this, the 30,000-foot overview. I'm going to delve into your childhood a little bit just to understand as to how you got to decide to do what you did in life, because most people would run away from what you ran into, not run towards it. 30,000-foot overview before we get into childhood.
From me?
Yeah, who are you?
Well, look, I grew up as the oldest of 3 kids in a town called Barrington, Rhode Island. My father was a boat salesman. My mother actually was a housemaker, took care of us until I decided I wanted to go to a private school in high school, and we scraped together some scholarship money and some financial aid, and she went to go work at a local university. I grew up competitively sailing. I went off to college, and then I got bitten by the political bug because I really found it sort of intellectually, like my intellectual awakening was sort of the idea of campaigning. My dad was more a salesman at heart than anything else. He taught me growing up early, if you want money, you have to make it yourself. So I sold greeting cards, birthday cakes, you name it, magazines. And so I was an entrepreneur at heart, and I love this idea that in politics, all it is basically marketing. You're selling a person an idea, asking them to give money, asking them to show up somewhere, asking them to vote. And so I really found a calling in politics in the early 90s, and we can get into the rest then.
Well, how many siblings did you have, or do you have?
I have 2 siblings. I'm the oldest of the 3.
Okay, and are you the only one who decided to go into politics?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And growing up, religious upbringing, political upbringing, what were your parents?
Yeah, great question. So we're Irish Catholic. My mom's from one of 5. My dad's only one of 2, but we're both sides are from Rhode Island, and which is like living in the same dorm in college. Like you can't escape your family in Rhode Island. Most people never leave. So it really is a very small state where, everybody knows each other. We went to mass every Sunday. I went to CCD. We weren't like overtly religious, but we were practicing Catholics. But politics was never discussed. My parents voted. They attended like PTA meetings, so they were civically engaged, but I was the only one who ever expressed an interest in politics.
It's very interesting. And but were you, despite not talking about it, were they leftist aligned, more conservative aligned, or did you not even know at the time?
It's interesting. So Rhode Island, we did elect some Republicans, but it was largely a Democratic state, which is interesting because it's a very Catholic state. So they would complain about government. I mean, I think as my father grew, he became much more open about his political beliefs in this country, very much more conservative. I would say that my mom is right of center. But again, it was more, there wasn't a lot of competition for a lot of races. So it wasn't like you went out and completed your civic duty, but largely Democrats controlled the state. And so more than anything, my father would complain about regulations, complain about taxation, talk about job creation and what was killing, bringing, business development to the state and things like that. But it wasn't like overtly political. Like it wasn't Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal. It was, here's why government sucks. And here's what people are doing to get in the way of job creation and business development, things like that. More my father than my mom. My mom never talked about it at all. Again, and it was more because my parents were more concerned with actually putting food on the table than, those big existential political questions.
So 3 siblings. Did you say that you went to private high school?
So here's a funny story. So I grew up, like I said, in Rhode Island. My dad's side of the family is from Newport. My mom's side of the family is from Barrington. Rhode Island's basically a U. Providence is at the top, and Aquidneck Island, which Newport is down here at the bottom, and Barrington is on the east side of the state. And my dad's side of the family, Newport, my mom's side of the family from Barrington. When they got married, she won the argument, and my dad's office was still in Newport, and he commuted every day. Which is where there's a private Catholic school called Portsmouth Abbey. It's a Benedictine monastery. And when I was growing up, my grandmother on my dad's side would always say, oh, the smart boys go to Portsmouth. She called it the Priory then, because growing up, it had been a priory before it was an abbey. And I grew up, 5th, 6th, 7th grade saying, oh, well, if the smart kids go there, I'm going to go there. And my parents just took it as a joke, like, okay. And then I started mailing away, pulling out little, those cards in the back of brochures and saying, I want the brochure. And my parents kind of humored me and were like, okay, if you're going to be this interested in education, sure, we'll humor you. And come the end of 7th grade, I was like, well, I want to apply. And despite not having the financial means, my parents were like, great, if you're this invested in your education. And to be honest with you, the only thing that I knew was that my grandmother had told me growing up, this is where all the really smart kids go. This is where all there was this allure of going to Portsmouth Abbey that my grandmother had. And so I was like, well, then I should go there. And, my parents were like, yeah, right, whatever. Well, I got in. I actually did very well in middle school. And so I got in. And then, like I said, we sort of just put a financial plan together where I got some financial aid, some scholarship money. My mother went to work for the first time, and their view was, if you're serious about this, and then we need to do what we can to support, our kids' education. I was the only one of the 3 that attended any kind of private school, and I was a day student, which meant Barrington was about 40 minutes from Portsmouth. And so I would literally, it sounds like the classic story that every parent tells now, but I walked about a mile to the center of Barrington. It's Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. We call it RIPTA. There was a bus that went through the center of town. I'd put a token in the bus. The bus would take me 40 minutes to the top of Corey's Lane, Portsmouth. And then I'd walk about another 3/4 of a mile down to the school campus. And at night, it was the reverse commute. So it took me about an hour and a half to get to school every day. But I was convinced that this was sort of like, my ticket out of, middle class dome.
And I'm Canadian, so high school starts in grade 7. But how old are you when you're doing this commute on your own? Are you 14 or 15? 9th grade. And now I had my other question there. As a student, you were rebellious. Were you sort of defiant to authority? Were you,
I was a good student. No, I was a good student. Did I do sneaky stuff here and there? Yeah. Well, there might be a few things that still have not come to light.
And this is back in the day when it was safe for kids to commute, and school had not become centers for indoctrination as we're seeing today. Or was Correct. It always the case?
No. And so did I do a little was I a little mischievous here and there? And did I do a few things that might have, in this day and age got me in a lot more trouble? Absolutely. But I think by and large, and especially by today's standards, I was a strong student. I mean, my parents' view was, hey, if we're paying this money, you're gonna study hard. I was involved in a lot of activities and athletics, and by no means was I like the troublemaker. I mean, I did. That being said, if you go back and talk to any of my teachers, there's a few times that I was asked to leave class because I was not exactly the most reverent student at times.
And had your teachers told you you're gonna have a life in politics, or you're gonna become a lawyer one day?
The lawyer path was actually what a lot of them, if you had to pin a lot of them down, they were like, you like arguing, you like making cases. But again, I think part of this to me was more of an entrepreneurial side. I wanted to make money. I watched my father pound the pavement, and my view was, I'll tell me what I need to do. So I'll fast forward for a second. My mother had gotten this job, as I said. She was the manager of East Asian Studies at Brown University, and that just meant she was the they called her the academic manager. She was sort of the office manager for all of the department, and I had been told by one of my high school teachers, at that time in the late 80s, Japan was on the ascent. And he said, look, if you could learn as an English speaker to speak Japanese, there's a lot of Japanese individuals that can speak English, but not a lot of folks in America that can speak Japanese. And so I went off to college as a Japanese language major. And to say that I sucked at it was an understatement. I literally got a note from the dean at the end of the second semester that said, please come see me. Apparently a D in Japanese is a D in English too. And so he was like, you might want to rethink this.
I mean, for anybody who has not tried to learn a second or third language as an adult, it's already difficult, let alone when it's entirely different characters. Like I was brought up, I speak Hebrew, French, and English, and then you sort of lose the Hebrew as you don't practice it. But the idea of being an adult and trying to learn a second language that involves totally different characters, a totally different alphabet, I mean, it's ambitious and it's not for everybody. So you go off. Well, one last question about the family.
Yeah.
How many generations American is your family? Like when did they make their way over here?
So interesting question. My great-grandfather on my father's side, William Spicer, is a Medal of Honor recipient. He came over on the boat, joined the U.S. Navy, and then down in Guantanamo Bay aboard the USS Marblehead was a recipient of the Medal of Honor. So basically, we're talking what my father, grandfather, and then that generation all came over.
Fantastic. A Medal of Honor, for those who don't know, what do you have to do in order to receive it?
You basically have to demonstrate that your actions saved lives. There's a lot of verbiage that goes into the medal, but it goes all the way up to the President of the United States. But it's for heroic action, usually that leads to the saving of several lives.
Okay, fascinating. So now you go to university. What university did you end up going to?
The name of it is Connecticut College.
Tried to study Japanese, at some point moved away from that, and then you get into, I mean, Wikipedia describes it as government.
That's it.
So what the heck does a degree in a BA in government look like at university?
So it's basically like political science. They just called it government. So it's the same thing as a political science degree. I mean, in terms of, we studied international relations, domestic politics, campaigning, all that kind of stuff.
And you had an interesting experience. I don't know if it was as traumatic for you as it seemingly was to have made its way into Wikipedia. You had a nickname in university, which was an interesting one that led to some conflict between you and whatever institution gave you the nickname of Sean Sphincter. So
the funny thing about that is so the funny, to your point about Wikipedia, making something bigger than it was, that's sort of, there was a writer from the Washington Post that went back and was trying to surmise that somehow this was the moment that I, realized how evil the media was. Mm-hmm. The incident, to be blunt, was such that if you can remember back in the early 90s, there was no thing as like spell check, and it wasn't the way that it is now where your phone auto corrects you, right? It was very rudimentary word processing. And the guy who was the editor of the college newspaper was actually somebody that I'd known very well. We had sparred a bunch in different political classes. And so, the point of that was that it was more like there was no way that mistake could have made if it wasn't intentional. I was a member of the student government at the time, and so I was very outspoken on a lot of issues. And my point was, it was more of, this wasn't some big university like UCLA or even Harvard or something like this. We're talking a college with 1,000 people. Your class was 300 and change at most. And so the editor and I had known each other a long time. And my point in all this was clearly an intentional act, to try to undermine, an argument and an effort that I was involved in.
And so, but I mean, how does it even, I bring it up almost as a joke because I read people's Wikipedia pages and they're so wildly outrageous depending on your political alignment that they go and fish up an embarrassing thing or what they think is embarrassment and post it as a prominent fact about your upbringing. How did this story even see the light of day after decades, presumably? I mean, I don't know, maybe you wrote about it in you yourself wrote it somewhere.
No.
How does anyone find out this story so that it appears on Wikipedia?
So it's a great, first of all, I want to start with the comment that you made earlier. It's a fascinating thing. I actually did a video about this the other day, that look at anyone on the right, their Wikipedia page. It's literally like, in fourth grade, he missed the toilet when he peed. Anybody on the left that has their thing, it like overlooks prison sentences and puts them up for sainthood. Wikipedia is a problem, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I will just say one of the problems that I have with where we're headed in AI is one of the things that AI is utilizing. There's 3 basic programs. One of them is Wikipedia, and if you're using Wikipedia as your basis and it's wrong, and it's filled up by a bunch of leftists, this is what our future looks like. And so I don't want to get off on a soapbox there, but this is part of my reason for concern. With respect to the story itself, there was a reporter from the Washington Post that was doing a profile on me. And when I say like he went back, I think you hit the nail on the head. This guy went back and was like talking to people I went to college with and coming up with the wackiest stories. I mean, in the story, he talked to this guy that like kind of technically was a roommate of mine. And I say that because within like 2 weeks, he ended up moving out of our like quad room. And he was telling this guy stories about my college that were completely false in terms of like what I had studied, the subjects. It was all in an effort to sort of trying to find that, what you're saying, that embarrassing moment, that anecdote that he thought would be featured prominently. And the idea that, as I just explained, this was sort of like me and a guy named Jeff, who was the editor at the time, kind of having a little spat over some issues. And as I maintain, I think it was an intentional way to just sort of embarrass me at the time. But the idea that makes it into a Washington Post profile on Wikipedia just tells you like where the left is these days.
Sean, we can get on this tangent a little bit because Wikipedia deserves to be publicly lambasted at every opportunity. But this is how your profile starts. During his tenure as White House press secretary, Spicer made a number of public statements that were controversial and false and developed a contentious relationship with the White House press corps. The first such instance occurred on January 21, 2017, the day following Trump's inauguration. Spicer repeated the claim that crowds at Trump's inauguration ceremony were the largest ever at such an event, and the press had deliberately underestimated the number. Can you believe that this is your intro? This is how your bio starts on Wikipedia, that your most egregious...
And it gets better from there.
No, but your most egregious lie, misrepresentation, was the number of people at Trump's inauguration when we are witnessing daily lies of the highest order from the current press secretary. I just wanted to bring that up because it's hilarious. Wikipedia...
But that's actually, you know what? I think that's funny. Like, I have not done this. To be blunt with you, I actually intentionally don't look at Wikipedia, my page in particular, because I just don't need to like get frustrated. And the thing is, there's no way to change it. Like I can't go in there and edit it. And but I guarantee you, if you go look at Corinne Jean-Pierre, it's going to say something like, Corinne Jean-Pierre served as the 2nd press secretary of the United States and is currently awaiting word from the Vatican on her sainthood.
I'm going to pull it up right now. It says, I'm not wasting the time on that. All that to say, I wouldn't get frustrated by it. I would take it as it is a sign of success and it is a sign of being over the mark. But Wikipedia, where it is fair, is about your military service. And this is something phenomenal because not everybody does this. I've never had a day of military training and military service. And I deeply admire anybody who has done it, even if I vehemently disagree with their politics. You went on to serve in the military.
Yes.
And explain what that's like in terms of training, in terms of day to day, how long you did it for, and what experiences you had doing it.
So actually, it's an interesting question. As I mentioned, my grandfather, great grandfather, was a Medal of Honor recipient. We had some. My grandfather worked as a civilian on the Navy base in Newport. I grew up on the water, as I mentioned. My dad sold boats, so I mean, growing up in Rhode Island on Narragansett Bay, you're kind of forced to not forced. It's the ocean state for a reason, right? I mean, you're out there in some capacity. I cleaned boats as a living, as a kid for to make money. And I'd always had this desire to serve. And back in the day, the military wasn't structured the way it is now in terms of the opportunity and the training. And so every time I went in to talk to them about signing up, they'd say, okay, well, we need 8 weeks to do this. And I was like, I need to make this much money to help pay for this. And, it wasn't all working out. Well, after I got out of college and then began working in politics, a couple buddies of mine, and one in particular who had known about this and kind of shared a similar interest, said, "Hey, there's a new program that the Navy's doing. I'm actually going through it. I'm joining it. I'd love to get you hooked up with it. It's a commissioning program for people who have particular specialties, and it's like randomly public affairs is one of them, but it's a lot like cryptology, oceanography. There's doctors and nurses, chaplains, and public affairs was one of them. And so I went through this program down to Pensacola, Florida." Received got my commission, and I actually joined the Navy at 29 years old. I just completed my 24th year, I think I'm got my math right. I actually am still in. I am stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, as the officer in charge of a unit down there.
And now, I mean, people think that the pinnacle or the summit of military service is active combat, without necessarily appreciating everything that goes, the sacrifice that goes into it, even if you never, don't see active combat. I mean, if you could flesh it out, just like what is the sacrifice, the time, dedication that goes into actually joining, serving? You spend a great deal of time away from home, away from friends and family. I mean, for those who've never done it, let us know what it's like.
So yeah, it's an interesting question because I think each of the services has a little bit different of a culture in terms of what they do and how they do it. I've served, as I said, 24 years in the Navy. 2 years of that was on active duty. And the rest of it's reserve. But I'll give you, later this afternoon, I drive down to Norfolk. I'm going to be working with my unit for the next 3 days. So on a irregular basis, you're kind of going down, you're making sacrifices to not be at work. You don't get time. Obviously now I've left Newsmax, I'm on my own. But it's not like your most employers. Newsmax never gave me a day to serve in the military. It was always using vacation days. And, that's the it's not, look, I love doing this. Some of my greatest friends are there. I can't tell you how much I get back through serving, finding this cause that's greater than me, and doing my little part. Look, you've got cooks, you've got CBs that build stuff in the Navy, you've got lawyers, you've got SEALs. Everybody does their part for what they're good at or what they're trained at. And that's what I think is so awesome. You go down there, you put the uniform on. It doesn't matter who's president. You're going, okay, hey, I'm here to serve this country and whomever the commander in chief is at the time. I find it to be this greater calling, this idea that you're giving back. Some people find a way to give back into the community. Some people, are coaches for their kids' teams or something. I love the idea that I'm doing my tiny little part to just do something to, at this point in my career, help shape the next crop of both enlisted and officers that serve from under me. But then you're going off every year for, sometimes a minimum usually of 12 days, sometimes 20. I was out on the USS Ronald Reagan a year ago for 20 something days. I was in Yokosuka, Japan last year for.
Just stop there for 1 second. You're on a boat. You're on a boat at sea for 20 plus days.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be a cruise for some or a nightmare for the claustrophobic. Depending.
There's no pool. I'll tell you that. There's a gym, but there's no pool.
Oh my goodness. Okay, fascinating. Okay, now what we're gonna do, Sean, we're gonna end this on YouTube, go over to Rumble, and get into some of the juicy stuff. The serving for Trump and everything else. But I got one question that I'm gonna ask here that we're gonna answer on Rumble and Locals. Having actively served over the last 2 decades, and more or less depending on the year, have you noticed, or is there an objective demoralization of the military today, given what's going on politically compared to 2 decades ago? But before you answer it, hold on. I don't want to start again. I want to end it on YouTube. Ending on YouTube, everybody, head on over to Rumble for the answer to this question and many more.